Hello, you're on the Reddit Reveals channel. The sound that woke me up wasn't the door. It was the laugh. Low, throaty, male. It vibrated through the vents. That soft, confident chuckle people let out when they're relaxed, when they think they're safe. And it came from my kitchen. I didn't move at first. Just stared at the dark ceiling. Tried to convince myself I was dreaming. That it was the TV, the neighbors, anything. But then I heard her voice. Her voice. Whispering, giggling, telling him to keep it down, followed by the scrape of a stool on the tile floor. My left eye started twitching. I didn't even know that was a real thing. Thought it was just something people said in books. I'd been sleeping alone in that bed for 5 nights in a row. Late shifts, yoga retreat, group cleanse. Right. But this time she didn't even bother hiding it. She brought him to the house. Our house. The one my dad helped me build with my own damn hands. The one with my name still etched under the floorboards in the pantry. I watched from the stairs. There are a lot of ways a man can break. Some scream. Some drink. Some swing fists or throw plates or burn the whole damn thing down. Me? I stood behind the railing like a child peeking down at Christmas morning. Only instead of gifts, there was this tall man with a 5 o'clock shadow and my favorite coffee mug in his hand. The one my wife gave me for our 3rd anniversary. It said you. Me. Forever. I wondered if he noticed. I wondered if she noticed. She was sitting on the counter in her robe. Not the ugly one she wears when I'm around, but the silky blue one she told me she only wore on special nights. They kissed. And that was it. No shouting. No drama. No big moment. Just click. Something inside me turned off. I left my phone in the fridge. I don't remember packing. I know I didn't take everything. Not even close. My suitcase still had the old airline tag from when we flew to Savannah. I stared at it too long. Almost ripped it off. Didn't. I did the dishes before I left. Not out of guilt. Out of spite. She hates when I leave food in the sink. Says it makes the place look like a frat house. So I left it spotless. Let her wonder why. My phone. I stuck it between the ketchup and almond milk. Let her think I vanished. Or got mugged. Or snapped. She deserved to feel unbalanced. I didn't even cry yet. People think there's a moment when you break down. Like a movie scene where you collapse in a gas station parking lot or sob into a steering wheel. That didn't happen. I just drove. Past 3 counties. For exits I didn't recognize. I think I laughed at one point when a squirrel tried to race my car across the road. Don't know why. It wasn't funny. Eventually, I found a motel with peeling red letters that said, vacancy, and a vending machine that only took exact change. I checked in under a fake name. Connor. That's what she wanted to name our first kid if we ever had a boy. Sick, right? The bread knife was still in the sink. That's the last thing I saw before I left the house. She was always terrified of knives. Wouldn't touch them unless they were plastic. So why was that one out? The same one I used to slice bread just a few days ago. Our last normal breakfast. French toast. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "You're still my best friend. You know that?" Now it's sitting in the sink, next to the mug that says forever. And maybe that's what wrecks me the most. Not the kiss. Not the robe. Not even the laughter in my kitchen. It's the knife. Because it was mine. And she used it. It had been 5 days since I left the house, and not once did I check my phone. Not even out of curiosity. It sat in that motel mini fridge next to a sweating can of Diet Dr. Pepper and an uneaten ham sandwich. Every so often, I'd open the door just to see the screen light up with new notifications like some kind of digital heart monitor. 48 missed calls. 37 texts. 3 voicemails. I didn't play any of them. I wasn't ready. It's strange. I used to wonder how people could just disappear. Leave entire lives behind. Jobs. Spouses. Pets. Now I understand. You don't plan it. It just happens. One crack leads to another, and before you realize it, you've slipped between the floorboards of your own life. And no one even hears the thud. But here's the part one didn't tell you before. I didn't just leave. I left something behind. I wrote a letter. Not a revenge note. Not a last-ditch plea. Nothing dramatic or dripping with poetic sadness. It was short. Just 4 sentences. And I didn't leave it on the pillow or tape it to the mirror like some poorly written breakup scene. No. I folded it twice and tucked it behind the radiator in the laundry room, halfway hidden in the dust. A place only I knew about. A place she'd never think to look, unless she was desperate. Unless she was searching. I wanted it to haunt her. That someday, maybe a year from now, she'd find it by accident, read my words, and realize I had been watching. That I had known. I didn't write her name. I didn't call her Ren, or my wife, or you. I just wrote this. There was a moment I thought about forgiving you. It lasted 3 seconds. Then I remembered the sound of your laugh while he touched our dishes. That was the moment I stopped being yours. That was it. Folded, hidden, buried in silence. I wanted her to feel the same way I did that night. Like something was missing, but she couldn't quite say what. After that, I drove. I kept changing motels every 2 nights, like some fugitive on the run from nothing. I paid in cash, kept the curtains shut, brushed my teeth in silence. I memorized the pattern of motel ceilings. How they all seemed to have that same yellow tinge, like someone forgot to turn the sadness off. And I waited for the inevitable collapse. It came on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a knock on the motel room door. I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I was. No friends. No family. No paper trail. I didn't even use my real name to book the rooms. The knock came again, firmer this time. I peeked through the peephole, a mistake, and saw something I didn't expect. Her sister, Marlo. Of all people, she was the last one I thought would track me down. She was holding a small white envelope and a face full of fire. I didn't open the door right away, just stared at her until she knocked again, then muttered through the door like she was trying not to scream. She's a wreck. And before you say anything, no, I'm not here to convince you to go back. I just need you to explain something to me. I opened the door a few inches. She looked thinner than I remembered. Pale. Angry. She shoved the envelope into my hand and said, "That guy? The one she was with. He wasn't just some fling." I didn't say anything. My mouth went dry. I didn't want to hear the next sentence. But she gave it to me anyway. He used to date me. And just like that, the world tilted again. Now I had questions. Too many. Why would Rin sleep with her sister's ex? How long had this been going on? Was it about love, or something darker? Something rooted in resentment? Marlo sat down in the cracked vinyl chair by the window like she was trying to piece together a murder mystery. She told me Declan, yeah, same name as before, had ghosted her 3 years ago after a 6-month relationship. She never got closure. Never even got an "I'm sorry." And now he shows up again, wrapped around her sister? She says she didn't know, Marlo said. But I saw the photos. They've been messaging for months. There it was again. That feeling, like the floor was trying to suck me under. Ren didn't just cheat. She betrayed her sister, too. She knew. And that meant she was willing to burn every bridge she had for him. Or for whatever this sick power game was. And now, thanks to me disappearing without a word, they were both unraveling. I asked Marlo one last question before she left. Did she look for the letter? She blinked. What letter? I smiled, closed the door, and went back to sitting in the dark. Because I knew she hadn't found it yet. But she would. And when she did, nothing in her perfect little world would make sense anymore. That was just the beginning. You can trace the end of a marriage to a moment. Not a big one. Not a screaming match, or a confession, or a message you're not supposed to see. Those come after. The real endings hide in places where no one's paying attention. In my case, it was a bowl of pasta and a seat at the wrong dinner table. This was 4 months before I disappeared. Ren had begged me to go to a housewarming party thrown by one of her clients. Some rich woman named Karis who opened an energy wellness studio and had more crystals than furniture. I didn't want to go. I'd worked 12 hours that day, my back was shot, and I already knew I wasn't going to enjoy watching strangers sip overpriced wine while name-dropping obscure yoga styles and brand retreats. But she insisted, said we never go anywhere anymore, that she missed the old days when we were spontaneous. So I put on the button-down shirt she liked, the gray one with the collar that never sat right, and we drove across town in silence. She didn't hold my hand. Not once. The house was everything I expected. Faux bohemian nonsense, filtered air, and conversations that felt like networking auditions. I hovered in the kitchen for most of it, nursing a warm cider and pretending to text someone. At some point, Ren had vanished into the living room to chat with a group of women dressed like sponsored ads for linen catalogs. I heard laughter, high and fake, and I knew hers was in there somewhere. Then I saw him. Tall, crooked smile, strong chin, wearing a vintage band tee under a blazer like he hadn't aged since college. I didn't know his name at the time, didn't even register him as a threat. He looked like the kind of guy who thought therapy was a scam and used the word vibe as a noun. He walked straight past me, didn't even glance my way, and joined the living room circle like he'd always belonged there. The second Ren saw him, something in her changed. Her whole face opened up, like oxygen had just returned to her lungs. She laughed different when she talked to him. Not louder, not flirtier, just freer. Like I wasn't in the room. Like I hadn't just driven her here. Like I didn't even exist. I stayed silent. Watched them from the corner of my eye. She touched his arm once, just once, but it was enough. I know my wife. I know her body language. I know the way she tilts her head when she's pretending not to be impressed. They talked for over an hour. I timed it. She didn't introduce me. Not once. The drive home was colder than any argument we'd ever had. She didn't say a word. Didn't hum with the radio. Didn't ask me what I thought of the party. Just scrolled her phone the entire way and smiled to herself. At one point, I asked, "Did you have fun?" She responded, "Yeah, it was refreshing." That word stuck with me. Refreshing. Like she'd been dehydrated and finally found water again. I wanted to ask who he was, but I didn't. I just nodded, kept my eyes on the road, and told myself I was being paranoid. 2 nights later, she changed her phone password. A week after that, she started sleeping with her phone under the pillow. 3 weeks later, she began calling me by pet names again. Sweet. Affectionate. Like she was trying too hard to prove something. I know now that guilt is loud when it's fresh. It gets quieter over time, easier to drown. I didn't connect the dots until much later. I didn't know that the man at the party was Declan, the same man who would eventually sit at my kitchen counter and drink from my mug like it was his right. But I should have known. I should have paid more attention to the sudden changes. The mystery clients she started seeing on weekends. The last-minute cancellations. The way she began dressing like she was going to meet someone she hadn't already been married to for 7 years. I should have fought harder. But I didn't. Because part of me was tired. Worn down. Like something had already started leaking out of the foundation and I was too numb to plug the cracks. And I think maybe she sensed that too. Maybe she decided that if I wasn't going to make noise, she'd go looking for someone who would. The most ironic part? That same night at the party, I had brought a small envelope with me. I'd written a handwritten note earlier that day. Something romantic. Nothing fancy, just a folded card with a little sketch on the front and the words, "You still make me nervous." I was going to leave it in her purse before we left the party, something sweet for her to find in the morning. But I never gave it to her. Because she didn't look at me once the whole night. I kept the envelope in my jacket pocket, crushed and forgotten, until I found it again months later, while I was packing my bag to leave. I didn't cry when I saw it. Didn't even open it. I just stared at it like a fossil from a version of me that had already gone extinct. That's what people don't talk about when marriages fail. It's not one big betrayal. It's the little things you buried alive. And eventually, they claw their way back up. I wasn't supposed to know she found the letter. That was the whole point. Hide it in a place she'd never look until she was desperate enough to dig through the dust and ask herself, what else did he leave behind? That letter was meant to shake her, not guide her. I wanted it to echo when the silence got too loud. But fate had its own plans. It was a Wednesday night, just after 11 p.m., when I finally broke my own rule and checked the burner phone I'd bought at the gas station 2 counties over. I'd only given the number to one person, Marlo, Ren's sister. The one person who didn't try to convince me I was crazy when I told her what I saw. The only person who knew where I was, in theory. She hadn't called or texted in days. I figured she'd moved on. But there it was. One new message. 3 words, nothing more. You need this. Attached was a single photo. Blurry. Dim. A corner of a page, torn and stained. And on it, in handwriting that was unmistakably mine, were the words, "I stopped being yours." Except that wasn't the letter I left. I stared at it for 10 full minutes, the blood draining from my hands. The original letter had 4 lines, folded twice, placed carefully behind the rusted radiator pipe in the laundry room. I hadn't touched it since the day I disappeared, but the photo Marlo sent me showed only 1 line, and it was written on a different kind of paper. Lined, spiral torn, like it came from a notebook. I felt a cold creep up my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioner rattling above me. Had she found the original? Had she copied it? Rewritten it? Why? The next message came 10 minutes later. She says you left this in her yoga bag. I know that's a lie. I didn't respond. I just stared at the screen like it might blink back. What was Ren playing at? Why pretend I left her something I never touched? Was she trying to reframe the story? Make it seem like I left her a parting gift instead of a ghost? No, it was worse. She was using the illusion of the letter, my words, to manipulate the truth, spinning a narrative where she was the one abandoned, blindsided, confused. Suddenly, I wasn't the betrayed husband who vanished. I was the unstable coward who scribbled something poetic and fled the scene. It was a tactic, a weapon, and the sickest part? It was working. The next day, I got an email from a mutual friend. Subject line, "What happened?" Inside, a few short lines. "Hey, just checking in. Ren's been a mess. Said you left her a goodbye note and disappeared. Are you okay? Want to talk?" That's when it hit me. She was rewriting everything, using my silence as a tool to flip the script. The note she forged gave her a clean version of the story to present to everyone. I left. She tried to save it. She's broken. She's innocent. I wasn't just erased, I was repainted. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall and bounced under the bed, screen cracked, battery sliding out. I didn't care. Let it die. Let the silence grow teeth. Because now I had a bigger problem. Ren wasn't just a cheater. She was a storyteller. And worse, a good one. She knew how to cry without making a sound. Knew how to lace truth with just enough fiction that you'd question your own memory. I'd seen her do it to others. That time a friend caught her gossiping, and she swore she'd never say that. That time she charged a spa weekend to our shared card and called it a mental health emergency. It wasn't new behavior. It was just finally aimed at me. But what she didn't know, what she could never predict, was that I had one last thread left to pull. Because the original letter, the one I hid behind the radiator, that wasn't the only thing I left behind. 2 days before I vanished, I placed a small, barely noticeable device inside one of the decorative jars in the kitchen. A voice recorder. I'd bought it months ago when I was working on a personal audio journal project and never used it. It could run for 120 hours, triggered only by sound. And I had turned it on before I left. Now, if the battery hadn't died, if the data hadn't been corrupted, if luck was on my side for the first time in this hellish unraveling, I might finally get the real story. Not just what she was saying to others, but what she said out loud when she thought no one was listening. I got in the car before sunrise. Didn't shave. Didn't shower. Just packed a bag, grabbed the spare house key from the motel drawer, and drove like a man who didn't know whether he wanted to prove himself right or wrong. What I found when I got there was not what I expected. The house was empty. Not just of people, of things. The living room had been stripped. The art on the walls was gone. The plants. Even the decorative rugs. Only the cheap lamp and my old recliner were left, both tipped on their side like someone had abandoned a stage mid-rehearsal. And on the kitchen counter, perfectly placed, was a new note. White paper. Black ink. My name in bold letters. Inside it said, "You had your silence. Now I have mine. Don't come back. W." I laughed. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I realized something in that moment. She still thought she was ahead of me, but she didn't know I was already 3 steps beyond her. Because the recorder? It wasn't in the kitchen anymore. I'd moved it. And what it really caught, would change everything. I found the recorder exactly where I left it. Not in the kitchen anymore, no. That was too obvious. Too risky. After she started sleeping with her phone under her pillow, I knew she'd get paranoid. Start checking drawers, sniffing around for clues. So 3 days before I left, I moved it into a hollowed-out book on the second shelf of the guest room, the one she never used. The one she told people was just for show. It was wedged behind fake poetry and decorative clutter, buried in a spine titled Wild Orchids, a meditation. When I slid it out, the battery light was blinking red, barely hanging on. I stuffed it in my pocket, didn't even wait to breathe, and drove to a rest stop 20 miles up the highway before I finally listened. I parked facing an empty field, put the car in park, locked the doors. My fingers hovered over the playback button like I was holding a grenade with the pin half pulled. Because this was it. Whatever came through those tiny speakers would either confirm I was right or ruin me. And the first voice I heard wasn't hers. It was his. Declan. His voice had a smugness to it, soft but laced with superiority. He spoke like a man who thought everything he said should be quoted. And he was in my house, in my kitchen, drinking my coffee, probably wearing a smile he didn't earn. "You think he suspects anything?" he said, casual, like they were discussing weekend plans. Ren's voice answered. Quiet. Measured. She always used that tone when she was trying to appear in control. "No. He's too busy feeling guilty. He thinks I'm stressed from work." I let him believe that. There was a pause. A chair scraped. Liquid being poured. Laughter. Then she added, "It's almost sad. The way he tries. Like he's hoping if he cooks enough meals or folds enough laundry, I'll start loving him again." Declan laughed. "You're colder than I remember." She replied, "No, just clearer." I pressed pause. My hands were shaking. Not from rage. I was long past that, but from some emotion I couldn't name. It wasn't betrayal anymore. It was grief. Grief for a version of me that still believed trying was enough. That still thought effort had value. That didn't realize he was loving a woman who saw kindness as weakness. I hit play again. More conversation. Shuffling. At one point, she talked about how she planned to make it clean. That she'd wait until after the holidays. Use the stress of the new year as an excuse. Phase Ellis out gently. Like I was a product subscription. Like she could cancel me with a polite email. But then came the part that truly cracked something inside me. She mentioned Marlo. "You think she'd care?" Declan asked. Ren chuckled. "She'll get over it. It's not like she's ever had something last longer than a season anyway." "I thought you promised not to tell her." "I haven't. But if she finds out, I'll spin it. I always do." My stomach twisted. It wasn't just that Ren betrayed her sister. It was that she felt nothing about it. No hesitation. No guilt. She'd weaponized sentiment if it helped her sleep at night. But then, near the end, was the part one never expected. Declan said, "You know, he's not stupid. He's just slow. Emotionally. Like he needs everything spelled out for him. But once he figures it out, Ren cut in, then he'll leave." Which is exactly what I want. I stopped the recorder. Not because I was done listening. Because I understood everything now. She wanted me to leave. Not in an angry, get out of my life way. No, she wanted me to do the work for her. To disappear, so she could play the victim. So she wouldn't have to be the one who filed the paperwork. So she could tell people I abandoned her, point to my silence as proof of instability. She was building the narrative before I ever caught on. And here's the kicker. She almost got away with it. That letter she forged? It wasn't just an emotional trick. It was her way of leaving behind a breadcrumb trail. A version of the story where she was the one picking up the pieces after her fragile, distant husband unraveled and vanished. And the friends were buying it. The neighbors were texting. Even her mother had reached out to ask if I was getting help. But now I had something she didn't expect. Proof. Not accusations. Not suspicions. Not dramatics. Just cold, digital truth. And the question that pulsed behind my eyes as I sat there in that parking lot, surrounded by wind and silence, was this. What do I do with it? Do I send it to everyone? Ruin her reputation? Expose her to her clients, her friends, her family? Or do I vanish for good and let the fire consume only her? There was a third option forming in the back of my mind, but I wasn't ready to face it. Not yet. Because before I made my move, I needed to know one more thing. Something that had been nagging at me for weeks, too vague to grab, but too loud to ignore. Something wasn't right about how she met Declan. She said it was a coincidence, a chance reunion, a fluke, but I was starting to think it was planned. By someone else. There's a certain flavor of betrayal that doesn't hit right away. It lingers in your bloodstream like a quiet infection. You walk around not knowing why your stomach twists at random times, or why certain memories make your skin feel like it doesn't fit anymore. But eventually, it reaches your brain, and then everything begins to rot. For weeks, I'd been haunted by something I couldn't name. It wasn't just the affair. It wasn't even the forged letter or the manipulation or the sickening tape of Ren mocking me in my own home. No, it was a detail I'd buried without realizing. A feeling that kept resurfacing every time I thought about how she met Declan. She'd claimed it was a chance encounter, something casual at a party, no big deal. But something about it never sat right. So I did what I'd been avoiding for too long. I went back to the beginning. Not to Ren, to the guest list. I pulled up the old event page from the yoga studio's archived newsletters. That ridiculous gratitude dinner they hosted 4 months ago, the one where I first saw Declan. The one where she never introduced me. I'd forgotten, but I'd RSVP'd online. And the email confirmation included an attachment, a PDF seating chart. Yeah, I know. Most people don't care who sits where at a work dinner. But this studio, Karis & Company, Wellness, liked to pretend it was a 5-star retreat center, not a place that sold aromatherapy diffusers for triple retail. They planned everything down to the freaking salt crystal placement. So when I opened the chart and zoomed in, there it was. Table 7. Ellis and Wren. Declan Hayes. And 3 other names I didn't recognize. They hadn't just met at the party. They'd been seated together. Deliberately. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. And then, like some cruel puzzle clicking into place, I remembered who had designed the seating. Graham. My best friend. My groomsman. The guy who gave a speech at our wedding about how Ellis would take a bullet for the people he loves. Yeah, Graham. He worked as a part-time operations consultant for the studio. Helped with events. Knew Wren through me. And knew everything about our marriage. All of it. Every fight. Every reconciliation. Every doubt I'd whispered over beer and backyard fire pits. He was my confidant. My sounding board. My "you're not crazy, man" guy. And he put them at the same table. He arranged the meeting. The walls of the motel room suddenly felt smaller. My throat burned. Not from rage. From humiliation. How many of them knew? Was I the only one in the dark, grinning like an idiot while they all watched the slow collapse of my life? I called him. For the first time in weeks, I picked up a phone, dialed his number, and waited. He answered on the 3rd ring, casual as ever, like we'd just missed each other at brunch. "Ellis," he said. "Damn, man. You okay?" I didn't waste time. "Did you put them together at the dinner on purpose?" He paused. Not long. Just a beat. Then, "Man, come on. You know I didn't know anything was gonna. Don't lie to me." Another pause. Deeper this time. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into that low, guilty register people use when they know they're caught. "She asked me to seat her near someone new," he said. She didn't say who. Just someone different. She said she was tired of the same people. I figured. Hell, I don't know. I figured it was harmless. You knew he was her type. She didn't have a type, Ellis. She had a hole she wanted to crawl out of, and I thought maybe giving her a distraction. She was married to me. I snapped. You distracted her with a loaded gun. I didn't know it'd go that far. Then you weren't paying attention. I hung up. I didn't need to hear him say anything else. The words were useless now. Whatever his intention, the damage was done. He'd lit the match and walked away before the fire took hold. Maybe he didn't think it would spread. Maybe he did. Either way, the house was ashes. Here's what you don't expect in the aftermath of betrayal. How deeply betrayal rearranges your memory. Suddenly, the things you thought were innocent become infected. Every joke Graham made about Wren being out of your league or too restless to stay in one place now landed like prophecy. Every time he said she needed a little more excitement, I'd laughed along, not realizing he was handing her the matches one at a time. The worst part? I don't think Wren even cared that he was my friend. I think she used him on purpose. Just like she used me. Just like she used Declan. It wasn't about love. It was about control. About crafting a version of herself that no one could pin down or predict. The free spirit. The wild one. The woman who couldn't be boxed in. Not even by vows. Not even by blood. She never loved anyone. She loved being wanted. And now? Now she was rewriting everything. One fake letter. One lie. One silence at a time. But I had something stronger than silence now. I had the truth. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of rage or grief or any of the usual suspects. I didn't toss and turn with visions of Declan's smug smile or Wren's cold eyes. I didn't reread the forged letter or replay the recording of their conversation. I didn't cry or punch a wall or whisper threats to a ceiling fan. I sat in a rented chair in a nameless motel room and stared at my own reflection, not in a mirror, but in the black window glass. Lit by the pale orange of a parking lot lamp, I could just make out the contours of my face. And I didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked still, not calm, not collected, just still, like he'd already reached the bottom and stopped falling, and now he was waiting for something worse. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't about Wren anymore. It hadn't been for a while. Sure, the affair was the trigger. The lies. The performance. The falsified letter. But what kept me awake that night wasn't her betrayal. It was the nagging, silent truth that had been clawing at the back of my mind for months, maybe years. I had made her this way. Not deliberately. Not cruelly. But slowly. Passively. Through 1,000 tiny acts of surrender. Through my silence. My avoidance. My fear of confrontation. I was so desperate to keep the peace. I'd handed her every piece of leverage without asking for anything back. I didn't push back when she mocked me in front of her friends. I didn't speak up when she stopped sleeping in the same room. I didn't argue when she erased anniversaries or canceled plans or changed the subject every time I brought up counseling. I let her drift further and further out, telling myself it was maturity, patience, love, but it was cowardice. I let her starve on a diet of apathy and assumed she'd be grateful just to be tolerated. I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, cooked enough, cleaned enough, loved enough, she'd come back. And when she didn't, I played the victim. Like I had no hand in the decay. Like the rot hadn't spread from the roots I planted myself. The realization didn't feel red-hot and explosive. It felt gray, heavy, like being underwater and suddenly realizing you've been holding your breath for too long. I wanted so badly for this story to be about her. About the cheating, the lies, the gaslighting. But the truth? This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a reckoning. That morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I wrote. Not a letter, not a journal entry. I opened a blank document on a borrowed laptop and started typing everything I remembered from the beginning. Not just the affair, but the relationship. Every good day, every fight, every red flag I'd ignored. Every moment where I'd chosen comfort over honesty. It was like bleeding out, and I kept going for hours, page after page. Not to share, not to publish, just to understand. Because for the first time in this entire spiral, I realized I didn't want revenge. I didn't want vindication. I wanted to know how I'd become a man who thought disappearing was his only option. And somewhere between paragraph 30 and 31, I wrote a sentence that made me stop cold. You made her feel alone, and then punished her for leaving. I stared at it for a long time, almost deleted it. But I didn't, because part of me knew it was true. Not the whole truth. Ren still made her choices, and they were cruel, selfish ones. But she didn't cheat on a perfect man. She didn't betray someone who fought for her. She drifted away from someone who had already drifted from himself. And maybe, just maybe, Declan didn't steal her. Maybe he just caught her when I let go. I didn't know what to do with that yet. I wasn't ready to call her. Wasn't ready to forgive. But I also wasn't ready to keep painting myself as the wide-eyed victim in a tragedy she scripted alone. I shut the laptop, packed the bag, and made a decision. I wasn't going back to the house. I wasn't going to confront Declan or Graham. And I sure as hell wasn't going to start dropping secret recordings like live grenades into group chats. I was going to do something that terrified me more than all of that. I was going to show up. For myself. Alone. Without her. Without a clean ending or a villain to blame. And I was going to find out if I had anything left to rebuild. Because for the first time since this all started, I wasn't asking, why did she do this to me? I was asking, why did I stay when it started to hurt? And that was the beginning of a different kind of story. The message came on a Thursday. I hadn't thought about Ren in almost a week. Not actively, anyway. She was like a bruise fading under my skin, no longer tender to the touch, but still visible if I looked too closely. I'd moved to a small coastal town 3 hours south of where everything burned. Rented a tiny studio above a bait shop. The smell of salt water clung to everything, and I didn't mind. I started baking again, not for anyone, just for myself. I took long walks along the shoreline, sometimes barefoot, sometimes crying without knowing why. I spoke to strangers like they mattered. I stopped checking social media. I even deleted the fake voicemail Ren had left me a few weeks earlier, the one where she almost cried, but not quite, saying she hoped I was okay. But then came this message. Not a voicemail, not a text, a letter, handwritten, postmarked from her city, addressed to my real name, sent to my new address. I hadn't given it to her. I don't know how she got it. Maybe Marlo. Maybe she guessed. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. I let it sit on the counter for 2 days before I opened it. And when I finally did, I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel dread. I felt curious. Inside was a single page. Not like the forged letter she had once crafted. This was raw, uneven handwriting, watermarked with either coffee or tears. Probably both. It read, "You were better than I deserved. I was angry at myself and punished you for it. I made you feel small so I could feel taller. You were never weak, just kind in ways I couldn't understand. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope the next version of you never hides how much he feels." That was it. No signature. No comeback. No manipulation. Just honesty, or something close enough to it that I didn't hate her for trying. I folded the letter, slipped it into the back of a book I'd been reading, and stood on my small balcony while the ocean whispered things it never says out loud. And for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel like a man who had been left behind. I felt like a man who had left something behind and survived. It's strange what survival looks like. It's not glamorous. There's no cinematic ending. No sudden moment where the pain disappears or the sun breaks through and floods your chest with peace. It's quieter than that. It's the act of waking up and choosing yourself. Even when the silence is louder than you expected. Even when no one is clapping. It's smiling at your own jokes again. It's realizing that being a sensitive man doesn't make you soft. It makes you strong in ways this world never taught you to celebrate. It's finding love again, not in someone else, but in the version of you that finally says, that was enough. I don't have to carry this anymore. I never replied to Ren's letter, because some chapters deserve a period. Not an ellipsis, not a second draft, just a clean, final line. But I did write one last thing. On a piece of parchment I left tacked to the underside of the wooden table I built in my new apartment. It says, I wasn't destroyed. I was remade.